Very warm welcome to the new episode of Ink and Insights. This is your host, Sumit Sarma Samir. This platform invites global thought leaders and promotes Nepali changemakers of diverse field. So please subscribe to the channel. This week, my guest is Reese Wong. Reese is a social entrepreneur, community builder, and speaker aiming to catalyze social impact. He regularly speaks alongside entrepreneurs, educators, and activists. As a social impact champion, Reese has been recognized as a World Economic Forum Global Shaper. He's a winner of 2024 Diana Award, Aspen UK Rising Leader, Future Minds 25 Under 25, and a YF Advisory Board member at the Royal Society of Arts. Reese, welcome to the Ink and Insights with Sumit Sarwar Samir.
Thank you so much for having me.
Reese, it's very interesting. You founded, a youth-led organization in Hong Kong when you were just 16. Can you share what inspired you to become a social entrepreneur at such a young age?
100%. I think my journey really started because I noticed a problem in the ecosystem. So all the way back, this is now 2019, I found myself to be very academically oriented. So I love doing these sort of social issues related activities like debate or Model United Nations. But I thought to myself, these are all really theoretical. How can I go out there and do more? How can I actually sort of do something in the real world? And that's when I did an internship at a mental health charity in Hong Kong. And I realized, wow, I just love doing projects. I love learning by doing. And it was really satisfying seeing how, quite simply, when you think of something, you can make it a reality. So after that internship, I basically set out to create a network of young people who are passionate and interested in social issues in Hong Kong. And that basically spiraled and transformed into the organization it is today, which is now focused on project-based learning and getting young people working on projects and building those key.
And it has grown to become one of the largest organizations in Hong Kong, right?
Exactly. Youth-led organizations has been running now for 5-6 years, and we've transitioned 3-4 leadership teams, still completely youth-led, youth-operated, but still going strong. And that's something I'm very proud of, because I think in these youth-led initiatives space, a big issue is really succession. So once the founder, for example, moves on or leaves the country or graduates high school, so on and so forth, it's very hard to ensure the project is able to keep thriving.
Right. And were there any specific moments or experiences that defined your path as a social entrepreneur?
I think so. One moment that I always recollect is during a speaking engagement back in Hong Kong in 2021. So this was at educational conference, and the audience was principals, educators, educational psychologists, and I basically cold called them and asked, hey, would I be able to speak at this conference, bring a Gen Z perspective, highlighting DEI in international schools? And one of the reasons why this was so pivotal was that, we put together a 40-minute presentation, we had a docuseries, we had a research survey, but what was powerful was actually seeing the level of engagement from the audience. And again, these are all principals, educators, and also after the talk, having them approach me and say, hey, would actually love to follow up, would actually love to make these things happen. And a lot of the collaborations did happen. So I think that was a moment where I saw, even giving a talk or doing these advocacy things, sometimes it's very hard to measure the impact. But there are those moments where you see, wow, telling these stories or doing this type of media advocacy-based work does make a difference. And you really see that in terms of the audience response and engagement.
Right. And what is the core mission of your venture? And how did you identify this as a problem you wanted to solve?
100%. So I think the situation in Hong Kong back then was, very academically driven, but there wasn't really a space to really explore projects, explore social entrepreneurship. So that was something I observed myself. There were a lot of these activities for people to, again, debate theoretically, but not really this thriving social entrepreneurial ecosystem, especially for young people.
Right.
That was a problem I saw myself. So really the initial mandate was just to connect young people passionate about these social issues, bring them together. And I suppose it evolved from there, pivoted when we saw, okay, we really needed something that was more tangible, that was sort of had a greater value proposition. Because I think a network is good, but it's even better if you have something for people to actually do or program And so we initially started with a magazine that people contributed to, ran, designed, illustrated, and then it slowly evolved into other projects like a documentary series, for articles, in-person events, and so on and so forth. But I think the mission has always been, how do you get young people really take control of their learning journey to have agency over their sort of change-making journeys? And yeah, we do this through projects.
Right. And are there any step-by-step, things that you take into consideration to change your idea into a viable venture?
I think the most important point is probably around validation. So ensuring that this idea is actually needed, people actually value it. And I suppose for us, it was seeing the response from schools and seeing the response from students. When we initially launched our first magazine, we saw 100, 150 applications come in. People wanted to contribute. People wanted to contribute to this bigger production. Schools are willing to help circulate this, promote it, share it with the network. So we were able to see, I suppose, that initial demand, and we were able to go on from there. So I think that is probably useful to validate whether this is needed, whether there is a receptive audience. Then I think secondly, it's also to be able to rapidly adapt. So I think for us, we had to evolve quite a bit. When we started off, again, it was just a network, but we saw what people actually wanted, where the value proposition lied. And I suppose, we had to pivot along the way as well. So I think these two things, one is like, does anyone want this? Is there demand? The secondly is, are you able and willing to pivot or change how you operate when needed?
Right. And as a young entrepreneur, how do you balance innovation with practicality when building solutions?
I think I tend to be a pretty practical person, but I think it's always good to have this sort of North Star vision or this sort of broader mandate about what you want to achieve. But I think the way to balance it is, yes, you can have these guiding principles, you can have these big missions, but then to back up all of the very practical, achievable goals, for example, ones that are specific, measurable, so on and so forth. So I think they don't have to be contradictory. You can have these big missions, but you have to be able to work backwards and be able to outline what are the exact steps, what are the how-tos to get there. So I think that's how I've approached it is, yes, I have big goals, but they're not just maybe resolutions, they're actually goals. They're actually 1, 2, 3, 4 steps in terms of how to get there.
Right. And how do you inspire and lead a team as a young founder?
Yeah, it's interesting. I think there's two buckets perhaps to this. One is when you're working with other young people. I think there's a real power to really strong volunteer-led teams, especially of young people, because in many ways, they're here to learn, they're here to build skills, and a lot of them might not have obviously a lot of experience, but they have the energy and the passion. And I've seen, even back in high school, a lot of these young people are able to produce amazing work, and really still blows me away to this day. People are motivated. I think that's the core thing. So I think from my end, it's really about figuring out how to bring the most value for them. Because I think, again, if it's a really voluntary-based network, the incentive mechanisms are probably different to your usual job, to a traditional sort of organization. So it's really figuring out, what drives them, right? If it's not going to be monetary compensation, it's probably going to be about the mission. It's probably going to be about the range of work they get to work on, the level of agency and autonomy they get to create new projects, the skills they build. So I think it's really highlighting that. And I think the second bucket, though, is working with others. And I think more and more other people in the ecosystem, whether that's your regular charity, your regular school, other institutions, are more receptive to the work of these youth-led organizations and the role they play, because they see that, they're solving a problem that these other institutions otherwise wouldn't solve. So there's this gap. These youth-led entities solve this gap. So they're actually pretty receptive to working with them. So I think, again, it's demonstrating what's in it for them, what's in it for these schools, what's in it for these other organizations. How do you make it a win-win? So I think that's my two approaches.
Right, Reese. It's also often said that today's generation is the anxious generation, the pretty anxious of all the things, and they tend to be dissociated with the larger issues and problem of society. That's just one argument. Do you buy that idea?
Hmm. I think it depends where you look. I think when we look at Gen Z, yes, there is anxiety. There is this sort of uncertainty about the future, whether that's on climate change, whether that's on AI, whether that's on, I think, the general, I suppose, state of the economy, cost of living, perhaps, for example, in the UK. And I think there is a large swathe of young people who feel as if they don't have that agency or autonomy and control of their future. I think that's true. But I also every day see young people who, in the face of this, sort of shape their own destinies and futures through social entrepreneurship, social action, or just ambition, raw ambition. So I think, yes, I think the macroeconomic or structural conditions make it very hard, yes, for young people to thrive. But even then, I still see so many young people who are doing such amazing work. So I think there is that scope, there is that hope, but it's challenging for sure.
And what qualities do you think are essential for a successful leader, especially in the social impact space?
This is interesting. So one of the sort of takeaways I had recently was at this conference with the World Economic Forum, and Klaus Schwab, who chairs the World Economic Forum, had this insight where of course, he's met thousands and thousands and thousands of leaders over the years at the World Economic Forum. And he observed these two things, was that the leaders he thought were most effective and most, inspiring were those that were able to be driven, what he called compass-based leaders. And so these were leaders who were driven by a North Star, who were driven by a very specific mission, vision, or goal, and they had a very specific mandate. So it's like a compass, it points north, and they were going to achieve it, regardless of what anyone says. The other leader he observed were more opportunistic leaders he called sort of signal-chasing leaders. And these leaders are those that are more sort of responding to external conditions, responding to opportunity, right? And there's these two different mental models. And I see myself a bit of both, right? I have a very specific North Star mandate, yes, but I will respond specifically to when opportunities arise. So, but I think what's useful about this is, having these two mental frameworks. So yes, knowing your North Star, knowing your mission, vision, but then I suppose still being adaptable. But I suppose, yes, the takeaway here is I think leaders need to have some strong mandate beyond just, raw ambition. There needs to be something that really drives them. But I think the second thing is also, in this day and age, being able to influence and communicate and persuade. I think now more than ever with AI and all this sort of automation of skills, what's really going to be the main differentiator is how are you able to persuade people that to join your team, for example, to persuade people that you should do certain things, for example. And I think, that's going to be super important. How do you communicate? How do you influence?
तिमीसँग अब धेरै टाइम छैन है बिहे गर्नु छ भने गरिहाल नत्र घरबाट मलाई अन्त्य बिहे गर्दिनु
भर्खर 3 वर्ष भयो एमबीबीएस जोइन गरेको 5 वर्षको कोर्स हो के भो जम्मा छ एक्सक्यूज मी सर मेरो 5 वर्षको कोर्स 3 वर्षमा सकाउन मिल्दैन
गेट आउट
हेलो
के सोच्यौ त
के सोच्ने मैले प्रिन्सिपलसँग पनि कुरा गरिसके 3 वर्षमा पनि के हुन्छ 3 वर्षमा
के भयो भाइ ल बस साउजी एक कप चिया कसले भन्यो 3 वर्षमा के हुँदैन भनेर यो हेर एलआईसी नेपालको धनवृष्टि योजनामा 3 वर्षमा पैसा फिर्ता हुन्छ
ए हो र
जीवन बीमाको साथमा धनवृष्टि 3 वर्षमा एलआईसी नेपालको धनवृष्टि योजना एलआईसी नेपाल.
And I was wondering, how do you measure the social impact of your work?
Yeah, I think that's interesting. I think a big debate always in the space is like, again, social impact measurement. How do you actually quantify it? So back in Hong Kong, how we did it for our youth-led organization was a few things. One, it was a very simple number, looking at internally, how many volunteers have we trained? So over time, this is the difference in our approach was we looked at our external numbers. Let's say how many viewers we had for our content. So we had like 30,000 viewers for all our multimedia content, for example, or how many events did we organize? You say, oh, okay, like 20, 30 events, or how many projects we ran, like 30 projects in here, here, and here. And I suppose measuring that is generally quite intuitive. You're looking at how much has been done, what was the sort of pre and post impact when you launch surveys of saying how did this build your skills. You can collect it qualitatively for these testimonials. So I think there's that, and which is useful to have and useful metric and data points. I suppose if we had even more resources, it could be even more in depth, conducting sort of like randomized control trials or doing really isolated like research studies on this. But we realized over time, probably the most impactful thing of a program like ours was, yes, there is the external impact, but a lot of it was also the internal impact, where it was the 300 volunteers, youth-led volunteers who had these volunteer-based roles, and seeing that their growth was actually more impressive than some of the external impact metrics. So seeing the fact that they ran the organization, they took up certain roles, they built these skills, that we found was actually very impactful. Training up these young leaders to have these project management skills, to have this organizational building skills, was an impact metric that we never considered. It wasn't necessarily in our initial mandate or vision, which was very external facing. But we found that actually the most impactful thing we've been doing actually is this internal capacity building. So sometimes it's hard to actually measure, sometimes it's hard to actually come to that. But I suppose impact comes in many ways.
Right. And can you share a success story or example that showcases the difference your venture has made?
100%. So, for example, when we had, let's say, all the young people pass through, a lot of them, for example, ended up at top universities, but a lot of them ended up, which is the best thing, starting their own socially entrepreneurial projects. So we had a time when I was the president where half the leadership team, for example, had their own and started their own social enterprise projects or social action projects. And right. I think that was very inspiring, and seeing, they were inspired to create their own thing, to build out and really scale their own impact. So that was amazing. Another story, which I think is interesting, again, hard to measure, is the sort of ecosystem change over time. So again, right. This project started all the way back in 2019. At that point, there weren't really this energy or ambition for youth-led organizations or this ecosystem at all. And within the 3-year timeframe, we saw at least a rise of 30 to 40 of these different youth-led organizations started by other young people in the space. Wow. And
that's amazing.
It's amazing. And partly, I think there is some part where we did do some ecosystem building work, where we did these in-person events, we gathered these sort of youth-led NGOs, and I think also just the external outreach work. But also, I think seeing this organization, which again didn't exist a year or two, and then was able to scale, I think inspired a lot of people to say, hey, I can do that too. I can start my own thing. And so I think they're, again, very hard to measure. We have anecdotes of this where people are like, hey, we saw what you guys did, and then they reach out for advice, and then they just launch their own thing. So I think, again, this is, I suppose, from an impact lens, quite hard to actually quantify it. But I suppose we did see an ecosystem difference as well, which is really amazing to see.
Right. And what are some of the toughest challenges that you have faced? And what lessons did they teach you?
So I think there's a few. One is around, again, how do you keep engagement? And this is a lesson I suppose I still have to practice every day with the new organizations I lead. But the main challenge was, again, if you're dealing with students, if you're dealing with people who aren't monetarily compensated volunteers, and you're dealing with a lot of them, how do you sort of ensure the incentive mechanisms are aligned? How do you ensure that they're motivated, right? And again, back to what I mentioned before, is around sort of why are they there? What skills do they want to build? What's in it for them? How do you have them get more agency and autonomy? So there's that. But I realized over time, actually, it's a massive, powerful asset to have 300, 400, 500 student volunteers, or these types of organizations, youth-led organizations, completely youth-led, because actually they're equivalent to maybe like a 20-person full-time team, actually. And I looked at the output we had, and yeah, it was like it would never. There would be the operating costs would be way too high. It would be a fully salaried like nonprofit organization, which is different. So there's that lesson. I think is the power of voluntary-based organizations where everyone is just volunteers. I was a volunteer. Everyone was a volunteer, and how much you could achieve for that specific type of model. But another lesson, I suppose, as a counterpoint, was also the limitations of that model. I think now I'm exploring more opportunities, and for example, using technology, so on and so forth. Because over the last year or two, I realized, I tried scaling the organization even more. I was saying, okay, how do we replicate the same model in other countries? And we launched in the Asia Pacific, across Macau, we launched elsewhere. We were figuring out, is there a way to commercially scale this, for example, so that it's commercially self-sustaining as well? And I think the challenge was that, yes, you could probably do that, but it's firstly going to be a very big tax on your time. But secondly, it was that there are probably limiting factors to how far you can scale, because fundamentally it's people-driven, volunteer-driven. There's no underlying technology necessarily that can scale on its own exponentially. So I think that was a bottleneck, was seeing, okay, yes, there's a power of these models, and it's really underrated, actually, if you think about it, like 300 voluntary staff. But there's still a limiting factor to how far your scale can go, because again, it's all about people. It's not about technology, which can, I suppose, scale infinitely. So that was a lesson. It's appeal, but also the disadvantages of these specific types of voluntary-based, like youth-led models.
Exactly. And how do you stay resilient and motivated during your tough times?
I think for me, it's remembering why I started. So what was the sort of reason I started in the first place? What was my mandate? So this whole North Star vision, I think there's that. But secondly, I think it's also realizing that there's always ups and downs. So there's always going to be challenges, and I suppose the natural sort of movement of things where, yeah, one day it will be challenging, the next day it might be better. So it's knowing that, yeah, there is this sort of vacillation, there is this sort of, I suppose, tumultuousness, but, you know, things do get better. So I think that's how I stay positive.
Reese, as a young entrepreneur, what advantages do you bring to the table that older generation might not have?
I think there's a few. One is that I suppose there is this level of ambition or eagerness and perhaps naivety even that is useful, because I think I've come into situations where I've wanted to launch ventures or tried to launch ventures now where I think if I had 10 years of experience, I probably just wouldn't do it. I'd be, this is not a viable market opportunity. It's what they call Y Combinator, like a target idea where it seems appealing, but it's unsolvable. But I think it's a lot of the times young entrepreneurs have this level of ambition and, again, this lack of experience that actually allows them to pursue these wild ideas. And in many cases, a lot of the times they do succeed because of the fact that they weren't held back by these conceptions of again, market realities or unit economics and all of these things. So I think it's that, level of being able to dream, being able to imagine a world that can be, that is very powerful. I think the second thing is also, I suppose, increasingly they are digital natives in the sense that everything they do will be built into some form of existing platform or utilizing some sort of social media, and more they are building in public. So you have people who are content creators or people who have very visible platforms and who are comfortable doing that. And I think that's the difference with this new generation is, again, digital natives, AI natives as well. And just because they've been brought up in that environment, it's sort of second nature to them in a way, I suppose, may be slightly more challenging for older generations as well.
Right. And how do you see the role of youth in solving global challenges today?
Yeah. So I think in many ways, I love this quote. It's this idea that, you know, young entrepreneurs, these change makers, young people in general, they're not just sort of leaders of tomorrow, this type of quote you get, but also the change makers of the day. You already see young people building interesting, very powerful solutions, platforms, organizations. I think that's only going to continue. And I think the sense is that therefore why education is so important, why this sort of education work has to happen is young people need to have the sort of mindset to even want to pursue this type of change, to even want to scale ambition, to want to do these things. So I think, yes, because one, even young people now are building and doing inspirational things. But number two, yes, they will be also the ones to hold these influential positions, to work on important ideas in the future. So there's also that sense, they need to be, I suppose, guided to the right principles, but also have the motivation and ambition to get there.
Right. And how can others from some of the other countries support or get involved in your mission if they are interested?
100%. So there's a few ways. I recently launched a fellowship that allows anyone worldwide, but also those in the UK, to actually work across the various organizations I'm now involved in through short 4 to 8 week consulting sprints. So you work with a team of 4 people and you solve a very specific problem, and then you get to engage with another organization. And you also get access to a community of personal development focused people. So that's one. I think number two is a lot of the initiatives I'm involved in now are also globally based. For example, the Global Shapers community is global. There's over 500 city-based hubs. So that's an amazing opportunity. But I think another opportunity is, just feel free to connect with me on LinkedIn or my website on my platform, and very happy to have a chat as well. Do a lot of mentorship, and happy to help out whenever I can.
Right. Reese, my last question to you is, what's next for you and your venture in the coming year?
Yeah, that's a good question. It's something I'm still figuring out myself in my final year of university. But I think really where I see my career going is at the intersection of social entrepreneurship. So really building these new institutions and new initiatives, but the intersection between that and technology policy. So I've been really excited over the past few years around AI governance, AI policy, but also really, I suppose, incentivizing innovation across innovation ecosystems, entrepreneurial ecosystems as well. I've been doing a lot of community building work here in the UK. So pretty excited to continue that.
Right. Reese, on that note, we'd like to wish you good luck for everything that you are doing right now and in the future as well. And once again, I'd like to thank you so much for your time. It was lovely talking with you. Thank you.
All right. Thank you so much for having me.